I'm here to present my proposal for a mixed method study featuring a collaborative student-generated video as a response to informational literature. The big three drivers of my study are what am I trying to find out, how am I going to do it, and why is it worth doing? I want to find out, do students comprehend informational literature equally as well by responding to text with digital video as they would with traditional written essays? I will be doing this using a quasi-experimental mixed method sequential explanatory design featuring the quant, big quant, little qual. And the reason why I am doing this, why this is important, is it could inform a change in classroom practices, which have not generally adapted to the new literacies Web 2.0 communication landscape. A little bit of background on this. 93% of teenagers in the year 2009 reported using the internet regularly, according to the Pew Internet and American Life Project. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, in that same year, 97% of teachers had the internet in their classrooms, with 93% of those having internet connections, but only 40% reported using them often. And 29% seldom, and the rest, 31%, did not use the computers at all. There is obviously a real gap in what they could do and what they do in their classrooms. And so to discuss the jargon before we go any further in the presentation, two key critical words that need to be defined are literacy and new literacies. I will be contrasting these two instructional modes. Literacy is what I understood as reading and writing printed text when I was growing up and going through school. So that is the traditional literacy instruction that a lot of you probably know as well. New literacies is based in the Web 2.0 world and the emerging technologies, and it is defined as the skills, strategies, and dispositions necessary to successfully use and adapt to the information and communication technologies and new social practices for literacy continuously emerging in the Web 2.0 world. We use all of this information to gather information, to answer questions, and then to share our answers and what we find with our friends on the internet and our colleagues too. This is actually literacy as knowledge creation. It's a very different view than just decoding. So clearly the problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that new literacies are still not being used in the classroom, even though access, one of the most commonly listed barriers, is actually, according to the research, not a barrier much anymore. Other first-order barriers that are often cited by teachers as to why they do not embrace new literacies include standards testing and computer expertise. They simply do not know how to use the tools. And then the first-order barriers create the harder to change second-order barriers, the internal barriers of fear, disbelief, and perhaps not wanting to share the power in the classroom with students. So the purpose of this study is to use a two-phase explanatory sequential mixed methods design to compare the two instructional approaches to elicit different student responses to printed informational text. One approach will be guided by the traditional view of literacy as a print reading and writing activity, and the other will use the new literacies approach to reading informational text, where the students will be creating as their response, instead of an essay, a video that they will share globally. My first research question is, what is the difference in basic reading comprehension between these two different approaches to literacy instruction? This question will be answered using two alternative forms of a 10-item multiple choice measure, which will be used for pre and post testing of student reading comprehension after they have gone through their instruction. My second research question is there a relationship between reading comprehension and general school attitude? I want to control for that, see if that influences their reading comprehension. To measure this question, to answer this question, I will be using two subscales of the Patterns of Adaptive Learning Strategies, PALS. Each has 5 questions. I'll combine them for a 10-question attitude survey. My third research question is the qual portion of the design, and that is, well, after they've gone through these two different types of instruction, how do they feel about it? What do they think? What are their perceptions? And this will be explored with a semi-structured interview protocol comprised of open-ended questions used in a focus group format. Now, I know I've already mentioned a little bit about the literature. It falls into 2 to 4 big sections, buckets, if you will. The first is the broadest constructivist social learning theories of the early innovators John Dewey, Lev Vygotsky, and Louise Rosenblatt, who posited that students who are social and empowered learn more and actually create knowledge. I'll tie this to the new literacies theory development that I have mentioned earlier by way of definition of the jargon, and then I'll tie that to the knowledge, to get a little bit more specific into knowledge creation theory as it relates to new literacies. And then the last portion of the literature review will review specific studies related to most narrowly the student-generated video. Most of the studies that you'll find on specific new literacy formats, modalities like video, they're all case studies. Very few, if any, have tied the use of new literacies and instruction to student reading comprehension or achievement. For the, I will be sampling 11th graders from the Southeastern United States Public School. This is purposive because I believe that the 11th graders will be the least tested during the year I will be doing the proposed research study. But I will use random assignment into the different treatment groups to control a little bit for, to kind of make up for the purpose of sampling. As I mentioned before, the quant phase will involve pre-test and post-test and attitude surveys as the quantitative measures. That will be followed by the instructional treatments, which I've already mentioned. One is the very traditional literacy instruction, and the second is the more non-traditional new literacies methodology. And I put on the back of your handout a little bit more detail. I know that we're kind of constrained by time today in case any of you are interested in some of the actual step-by-step processes. The phase 2 portion will be, as I mentioned, the focus group interviews. They will be semi-structured, and I'll be using some of the attitude survey information that I get to create some baseline questions for the semi-structuring of the interviews. Then comes the data analysis. There will be, of course, descriptive statistics for all. And then the quantitative analyses will basically be correlational analyses. I may use some ANOVAs to compare the attitude surveys, the pre and post tests, and the EOC scores, see if there are any commonalities in those 3 different measures. I'd love to get free and reduced price lunch statistics, but I doubt if that'll be possible. I'll be really surprised. For the qualitative analysis, the 2-step approach will be used. I'll do the open-ended coding and theme identification, followed by I'll be taking those and then looking at them through the theoretical framework of knowledge creation. I wanted to add a little bit of bracketing here. I really would love for the results to show that students learn more when they use new literacies, but as I have, and I was going to actually have a hypothesis, a directional hypothesis attached to this research, but as I have conducted more and more of the literature review, I realized that because standardized testing, like the pre and post test I'll be using, measure very discrete item, narrow bits of knowledge, most of the time, if you do try to use new literacies instruction, they end up scoring worse than the traditional type of instruction, which is better fitted to a discrete item test. So I am bracketing myself subjectively and going with no hypothesis whatsoever. Now, speaking of subjectivity, there are 3 limitations that I can perceive so far to my study. And one, of course, I've already mentioned the sampling limitations that I'm trying to control by random assignment. And the instrument, I do have some instrument limitations, I believe. As I mentioned, there may be a real disconnect between the new literacies instructional format and the discrete item design of the instrument. And then, of course, there's teacher effect. I am trying to put in some controls for this too by scripting the instruction. But of course, every good study has at least a couple of limitations, which I will note duly in my write-up. But the potential significance of this study, I hope well, clearly it will address a gap in the quantitative data collection and analysis in the research literature, which just isn't there at all. Regarding new literacies. It will add qualitative student data to the research literature on digital video generation, and it may also illustrate that digital video as part of instructional strategy can be used to teach informational literature. And I believe I have no time left at all, but if anyone has a burning question, please do feel free to ask it now. Thank you so much for your attention.